Our next session is a panel discussion on the enhancement to KVH's role, which is in emergency response management. Many of you in the room will know our panel members, but I'm going to ask them all to come up now and they'll introduce themselves. So first of all, we've got Mike Murphy from KGI, New Zealand Kiwifruit Growers Incorporated, Leanne Stewart from KVH, Chris Bainbridge from Zespri, and Peter Rowlands from Trevelyan's. Once they find their seats, I'm going to ask each of them, starting with Leanne, to share with the room your current role, and then we'll get the ball rolling with a bunch of questions for you each.
So doing roles first?
Yes. Yeah. There you go.
So good morning everyone. I'm Leanne Stewart, the Chief Executive at Kiwifruit Vine Health. I've been working in biosecurity for coming up 15 years now, in government, international and industry organisations, so it's my passion.
Yep. Morning, my name's not Colin Bond, it's Mike Murphy. I head up the communication and strategic projects at KGI, which involves the crisis response side of things, so I sit on a lot of different groups, sharing information and intelligence on crisis and response.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Chris. I'm Head of Risk and Insurance at Zespri. Part of my role is coordinating crisis response. I've been in the role for around 4 years, and during that time we've had a few troubled waters and have had to instigate that response. So a little bit of experience there.
So Pete Rowlands, I'm Head of Business Improvement at Trevelyan's. I'm probably the fraudster here. My background is 30 years in the military, UK military, where I was involved in a number of operational tours and executed responses to ongoing operations. So I'll talk about a couple of examples of that and how that is linked in to the kiwifruit industry.
Thanks, team. So the way we're going to run this is I'm going to ask these guys a couple of questions, and then it's up to you guys to keep the momentum going. So start thinking about your questions in emergency response management. Leanne, first up for you, can you provide us a bit of an overview of what ERM is and why KVH is leading a project to develop an ERM framework for the kiwifruit industry?
Sure. So currently within the kiwifruit industry, when an emergency occurs, there's several organisations that undertake activities, but it's nobody's dedicated role at the moment to coordinate during an emergency, which means when something happens, it's not BAU and everyone's stretched. So when Cyclone Gabrielle happened, and other recent events, the industry leadership had a look around and thought, how could we do this differently in the future? So KVH has been working in biosecurity readiness and response for over a decade now, quite successfully, we think. So we identified this as skill sets that could be valuable in other types of emergencies that are significant to the kiwifruit industry and also have an impact on vine health. So emergency response management, or ERM, what we're proposing to include is readiness work. So in peacetime, you understand what the risks are. You could develop some plans around that before something happens, same as biosecurity. During a response, it would include emergency response management coordination. So it wouldn't take over anybody's activities that they are responsible for or they have mandate for within the industry. It would mean that there's just a coordination framework over what happens so that we can be more effective. And that would include governance and operations. And then after an event finishes, we'd look at lessons learned to make sure that we can be more prepared based on what has happened during an event. So what are the benefits of this? It's looking at providing faster support to growers and being a bit more effective in how we deploy resources. We're seeking to use the Coordinated Incident Management System, so SIMS, which we learnt about yesterday. It's used in biosecurity already, and it's used by civil defence during emergencies. So same framework, so we're using best practice. making sure that there's one source of the truth going out to growers as well, so not duplication of messages or anything confusing. And then at the industry leadership level, it facilitates collaboration and transparency amongst leadership. So not everyone's off doing their own thing, we're doing it together and we're more coordinated. So at the moment, KVH has been working with other industry organisations to develop this framework, and we intend to have it in place by the end of this year, so that when the next event happens, we're more prepared and hopefully we can minimise impact to growers and any risk and damage to their orchards.
Thanks, Leanne. Mike, NZKGI has had a lot of feedback from growers. Can you please give me an idea of what you've seen or heard regarding recent environmental events and how the industry could have done things differently to support growers?
Yeah, that's a really great question, thanks. I think that Leanne really hit the nail on the head there, that there's a real need for structure and strategy when we come to crisis response, and Gabriel was a really great example of that. You know, it's a massive event. The cost implications are higher than, or seem to be higher than the cyclone bowler. What can we do as an industry to make sure that the people that are impacted are really supported in the immediate, mid and long-term response? And so the way that we responded, KGI responded initially, is we went out and we said to the, we had to find out who the impacted growers were. And even that was a challenge in itself, and it was really utilising the stakeholders around us. It's great to see Sue here, for example, being able to use the maps that Zespri's got, getting into the intelligence. It's good to see Ruth here as well, getting the intelligence and really who's on the ground, our reps that are on the ground, what do we need to know, who is impacted and how can we respond to that, what's the immediate need, because every event is different as well, and there's so many complex variables at play. It's not always a straightforward process about this is a plan that we're going to roll out. So that was the immediate thing. And kiwi fruit's a special sort of breed as well. It's different from what you'll see in other primary industries. You can't move kiwi fruit to high ground. There's sort of limited things that you can do in a response. Water pumps are really important in a flooding event like that. So there are some things you can do, have some assets available, but also you need to be able to be on your toes. And so by having a structure and a strategy in place that you can roll out, where you know who your stakeholders are, you know what your roles and responsibilities are, then that helps a lot. And so we went down, Colin went down quite quickly, ascertained that silt seemed to be the major issue, and the removal of that was quite critical. And it was really great to see growers step up, and we have so far received over $280,000 worth of donations from growers and the wider industry to support the people who are impacted on the ground. So we've got around about 35 quite impacted growers from Gabriel, and also from the flooding in the Bay of Plenty that took place just before that as well. And that's when we're talking about the donations, about getting that funding straight away. I think John was talking about that before, getting that funding out there straight away as soon as possible to support those impacted growers. And so that's been the short term, finding out what the needs are, medium term, getting that short and medium, getting that long term funding out. And then there's also, from the KGI perspective, that long term implications. We're looking at the pastoral care side of things. So mental health is really important, especially at the moment with all the financial strains that are going on. So the question really comes about, you see the complex variables that are at play, you see all the different stakeholders that are needed to respond to something like this. How do we actually create that structure and strategy in order to be able to provide a really good response? And I think that's what Leanne's talking about there, that ERM side of things, about having, we've got the people there. It's about creating that structure, about pulling these people together, having close communication, so we know how to respond to that. Already existing is the Primary Sector Coordination Group, which feeds intelligence into MPI. So there's some existing frameworks which the kiwi fruit industry can utilise, and also get learnings from. And pull that into play. So it would really be great to see, and NZKGI is supportive of working in that space. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Mike. Awesome. I'm going to jump past you, Chris, and I'm going to get Peter. Peter, you've had an amazing career. Some of that career's involved emergency response management, and therefore you know firsthand the importance of planning and the consequences if you don't. Are you able to share some of your experience with us, and then also comment on the importance of post-harvest organisations being involved in the development and operation of that ERM framework?
Absolutely, sure. So I'll try and link the two in around the planning part. The first, I'll give an example. I was a grand title of the Chief of Staff J9 R&D. So in layman's terms, that means that I was in the planning, policy and legal team that was involved in the reconstruction and development of the Kajaki Dam in Afghanistan. And so that was a dam that provided power down the Helmand River. And we needed to look at the infrastructure. So our planning was simple. We were going to bring in some American contractors. We were going to get them to work along the infrastructure in 1K sections, making sure that it was intact and we could operate there. If it wasn't, we'd conduct the necessary repairs. What we needed to do was provide them with a level of protection around, and for that we used the ANA, the Afghan National Army. But the Taliban had a different idea, and because we were working in that area, what they wanted to do was disrupt us as much as they could. And so our planning was fantastic, or we thought. Until my interpreter came up to me one day and said, "Pete, I think we can stop all this problem." And so listening down into him, I said, "Yeah, how can we do that?" He said, "Well, if we employ locals in that area, the Taliban won't go in and attack them." And it was just local intelligence that provided us with a really simple solution and actually saved a lot of lives because we used locals in that area. And I suppose my story there is, seek local advice in everything that you undertake if you're into emergency planning. Second example, I left the military and I still continue to work in areas of conflict, Afghanistan, Iraq and Kurdistan, and I was with a team delivering a flexible oil line for a UK oil company in Kurdistan. And ISIS had made its road path through Kirkuk into Mosul, and were heading for a place called Dohan. And our oil field was about 3 k's from the conflict line, and ISIS were making inroads. And so the decision was made by the oil company that they would evacuate the country. And so we had a plan. We had 30-odd vehicles lined up, and our plan was sound and intact. We'd used the equivalent of RSEs, TCNs, third country nationals, and they could be Filipinos, they could be Bosnians, they could be Serbians, and from other outlying countries. And our communication was simple. You got in the car, you took an alternate route, of which we gave a route card, so a map, all highlighted. We were to go in convoy. What we hadn't taken into consideration was the fact that these third country nationals, their first language wasn't English. And so we were going along, and the convoy obviously got spread out over a distance of time. And actually one of the vehicles turned right, which would have been the normal route, towards Mosul, which is where ISIS were. The only thing that stopped them was the Peshmerga, which is the Kurdish National Army. And they managed to stop them at a great pace of knots, turn them around and send them back to safety. So the lesson learned from that is communication. Don't think that because you've given a verbal instruction that somebody understands it. Confirm that they've understand it. And indeed, if there is a language barrier, put somebody in there to make sure that it is understood and indeed escort them through. How does that tie into the kiwi fruit industry? Well, I think, and how is a post-harvest facilitator able to assist in this emergency planning? Local intelligence, and let me just click on Gabriel, for example. From a grower's perspective, they are the most important thing, and they will give you what is relevant to them. If you can get a collective picture and elevate that, KVH, Zespri, then get better intelligence. With better intelligence becomes better informed decisions. So that's the first part. And again, communications, that's absolutely vital. Communications work both ways. And those, dare I say, in Fraggle Rock at the top, they believe and they make assumptions. But the reality is on the ground, there's something else is happening. And you have to be down at ground level to understand what is really happening and what support and how you can best provide that provision to them. So those would be my examples.
Awesome, thank you, Peter. Finally, Chris, last but not least, from a Zespri perspective, can you please provide your insights into the benefits you see from a coordinated industry response and how this would protect the Zespri brand to ensure you deliver high-value fruit to our customers and consumers?
Yeah, certainly. I guess so. To start with, my role at Zespri as risk manager is trying to predict, what are these challenges that are going to come and hit us in the future. I don't know if it's because I'm not great at my job or because just the nature of a crisis. We tend to. It's always the last thing you expect. Sometimes that does hit you in the face. And what I think, and why I think this is such a great initiative, is to have those generic tools in the bank ready to go. And the other thing that I've learned is from an industry's perspective, the community we have, everybody's willing to get together and help, but what you really need to make sure you've got that coordinated response and you're all working on the same sheet and you're all working towards that same goal and strategy. And so, I really do think it's a fantastic initiative. I think in the past, as an industry as a whole, because of that, community spirit, we have, I would say, done pretty well in responding to crises. So I don't think, initiating this group is necessarily saying, hey, we've done a poor job. But what it is saying we can always do better, and there's always lessons learned. And that's the other important thing. I think in the last conversation I heard, it was, it's difficult to get resources outside of a crisis sometimes to think about, that pre-planning. But having a group together that can have those lessons learned, that can complete simulations, can have this, as something that's ready to go to pull out your pocket is so important. Because the other thing that we've learned is, those initial decisions are really critical in terms of the overall response. And you need good intelligence in terms of what Peter is talking about, but you don't want to be stuffing around with who does what. You want to know that off the bat, and those really good people can get to that job, have that understanding and get to it, which also stops duplication of effort. So I think it's just an ongoing process. You always have to, you don't just do it once, you always have lessons learned every time we've gone through something like this. We always look back and go, wow, we could have done better, this could have had better, and it's about learning from those and having that structure in place where also, nature of the industry, people change and things like that, but having a structure where, that's set in place and people can come in and fill roles is really important. So, I think it's a fantastic initiative.
Just you want to follow on a little bit there. What does it look like then for our customers and consumers when we look coordinated here? How does that affect the Zespri brand? Yeah, that's so important, and I want to reiterate that as well from a customer brand perspective. You've got to make sure you're singing off the same hymn sheet, 100%. Thinking about anything that's related to brand and or media, you don't want conflicting reports coming out. And one thing, learned really recently is the media is a separate beast, and they will take headlines and run with it. And if you're giving them any flint, that fire roars pretty widely. So that, from a brand perspective, is really critical. And also, I think just generically in terms of the industry and the amount of knowledge, that's within the industry, it's not just sitting at Zespri. The knowledge is throughout. So having that technical expertise that you can go to, have that support and tap into is really critical. Good on you, Chris. I'm going to open the floor up first. Are there any questions out there that are burning regarding emergency response management? Yep, here we go. Excellent.
Hi. Given that we've got the privilege of the single desk within the kiwifruit industry, probably more for you, Leanne, how do we compare to other industries, in the pip fruit industry with their emergency response compared to ours?
Is this on? Yep. So I actually went and met with New Zealand Apples and Pears a couple of weeks ago, and they very graciously shared their learnings from their response to Cyclone Gabrielle. They would have done a few things different in hindsight, but they did extraordinarily well during a massive crisis with not as many resources as they would have wanted to have, and extreme uncertainty as well. So they have got a few things that they're going to change moving forward. But then looking at other primary industry organisations, we've also been really grateful to learn from our New Zealand wine grower colleagues. So Ed, that we've met yesterday, they operate a combined portfolio of biosecurity and emergency management. They've done that for about 7 years, just because it's the same skill sets, and it works really well for them as well. Dairy NZ have got an emergency response management framework, very similar to what we're intending to do as well. And Federated Farmers have done a bit of work in this space as well. So there aren't too many existing frameworks, but what we've all learned is that that won't be acceptable in the future. We need to make sure we've got more planning so that we are more prepared, because it's not a matter of if, it's when the next emergency happens. Yeah.
Hitting the ground running is important, right? You mentioned it, many of you. Hitting the ground running, not having to sit around and think and plan while Rome's burning. Juliet.
Just listening to some of you speak, there's something in the technical expertise that's needed, as well as the human psychology expertise. What's your view on the balance of how that should be in a response? Probably, sorry, is it Andrew on the end?
No, Peter.
Peter, sorry. Yeah, probably more for you, because, yeah, I guess I come from a technical background, but also realise the value of having those people on the team. So what would you say is a good balance? I
think it's the configuration of a team and having flexibility to push and pull resources, because each incident will require different resource. You know, as you say, it could be a biosecurity incident, it could be a natural disaster. So it's actually having the right resource available to address each and every event. That's the critical part. And not being afraid to push and pull people either. You know, just because somebody's the CEO of a business doesn't mean he's the right person to be the controller. It's having that expertise around you, or having the person at the top, but all the expertise around. And as I alluded to, having the good intelligence is critical, but overpinning all of that is the communication lines. And then what do you do with that communication? So, yeah, absolutely. I see a purpose for the technical, but as I say, personally, it's on an event-by-event basis.
Does anybody else want to add to that same question, Leanne?
I also see a role for technical experts during readiness as well, because KVH is a biosecurity organisation. KGI and Zespri and post-harvest have different skill sets as well, but it doesn't mean to say we're experts in natural disasters and the impact that there would be on orchards and fruit. So it could be that you involve subject matter experts during readiness planning, but then also in a response, just like biosecurity, if you've got a complex question that you need to solve, we form what's called a technical advisory group, a TAG, which is a co-acronym. And that's where you bring your experts in to answer a specific question. They might be in New Zealand, they might be offshore, as John Brightwell mentioned yesterday during his response talk, to make sure that you've got the best information to answer the problem to move forward as quickly as possible.
Yeah, good. Monica.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Juliet also said, that the human response, because I've been through GITA personally and at work and with the industry when I was down in Motueka. And so many people cope in different ways. And if you're personally affected, which we saw also with Pipfruit New Zealand, because I was also down in Hawke's Bay for the immediate disease response after Gabrielle, it's so many people don't cope. And if you're personally affected and your communication is down and your power is off and your head office is underwater, I think it's very complex. So you've got to be flexible. I know when the civil defense came and knocked at my house, I felt there were bullies. And maybe people need to be bullied sometimes, to help themselves because they're frozen. I felt I didn't need to be bullied, but and I'm still holding on that, and rightly or wrongly, we don't know, whether I'm feeling the right or the wrong way. But I think it's all these things that you really have to contemplate. It's complex, but the flexibility is really important. of your response and having a plan B, C, because as you said, you know, that the plan might be a good one, but not the right one.
Yeah, I can only agree with the sentiment to that. I think PSA is a really great example of where the technical side was extremely important, how do we progress on, but also the pastoral care side, the psychological impact upon growers, their mental health and well-being was extremely important as well, mostly around, you know, the financial strain, which a lot of growers are experiencing right now as well. So, yeah, absolutely.
If we get another question out there? Yep. John. Oh, we need to get him a microphone.
I was just wondering about, after hearing about this tag, I was wondering about, it's more of a slow-moving disaster, but like climate change is on the radar, and I was wondering if there's like a tag that's been formed for that, and then sort of what the industry is like looking ahead. Is it on the radar?
Who wants to have a crack?
I'll just say from the disaster side, and then I'll pass on to Chris about climate change. So there are a number of natural disasters which will probably increase in frequency because of climate change, which we're seeing all over the world at the moment. You know, present example is the wildfires in Hawaii, which are just devastating. So we're making sure that we will do some readiness work around those sorts of disasters to prepare for them, because they're more likely to be before us sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I guess it's climate change is twofold. You know, there's the slow moving beast, which has implications probably, you know, biosecurity, fruit, all sorts of things. But then we're also, you know, seeing those immediate impacts around flooding and the like, and that's why, you know, this coordinated response. And once again, it's difficult to predict what would exactly be next. Is it hail? Is it flood? Is it extreme drought? It's hard to know, but that's why having, you know, a generic response ready to go is really important.
Shane. Time for a couple more questions.
I guess it's a comment really, but I think this is a fundamentally massive thing for the industry to get on board. And having lived through a couple of the examples that have been put up, and the diversity, I think it was, sorry, is it Peter? Yeah, Peter said, we were the technical people involved in a lot of this sort of stuff, and one thing that I learnt from all that was fantastic for my team, PSA days. We got some of the psychologists who were involved in the Christchurch youth case involved. Not only did I help my team cope, because it wasn't, you know, these people were sharing what they were feeling, but also this whole, I guess where Juliet was coming from a little bit, that whole human behaviour and people react. It was immensely, and we would never, if you ever do it again, they are fundamental to making things work effectively.
Yep. Can I just put a response on that? So you're absolutely right that, you know, I think you've pinpointed it. That mental health part to any crisis is essential. And the more support that you can provide to your people. And when you build the team, and I talked about resource, it's having understudies. It's having somebody, they can't work, you know, 30 days on. They need to be replaced. So it's understanding the format of your team and their capabilities as well. And whilst we push everybody to their limits, I think it's vital that we understand what the limit is as well.
Gee, Shane, we remember a few of those days, mate. We didn't quite get some of those working the right number of days in a row right in PSA, I tell you. Any further questions? I'm going to leave the panel with one last opportunity. Any more from the floor? All right, you're just about done, guys. I want it in 10 words or less. Oh, we have got Monica. Okay, then I'll give you your final challenge.
I just wanted to add, yes, the mental well-being, because you need to look after your people first before you can, but it's also the financial well-being and the mental well-being goes so hand in hand. And I think I coped well with Gita because I knew I could afford it. But my friends, some of my friends who couldn't afford it, you know, dealing with EQC, dealing with, so I think that's an important component. What financial reserves do you have in place for people to tie them over in whichever way?
I think it's really relevant because one of the key criteria during considering do you stand up an emergency or an adverse event from MPI's perspective, is ability to cope, and it's the different criteria within that: economic, social, cultural, environmental, so that, you know, if it's beyond people's coping abilities, they need extra support, and that's when you stand up or you activate your responses.
Thank you all for your questions. Your last challenge, panel. In 10 words or less, what part of ERM do you think is the most important for the kiwifruit industry?
From my perspective, it's probably having one source of the truth, so that there's just clear, consistent messaging.
Good on you.
Yeah, I don't want to stand on Peter's toes. Communication there is really important.
I won't steal the other two, so I'll go with coordination, all working towards the same cause.
Build a framework for most events, plan and rehearse.
Excellent. Excellent. Round of applause for the panel. Thank you, team. Awesome job.